And earlier I spoke to Charu Lata Hogg, an expert on Sri Lanka at the foreign affairs think tank Chatham House. She joined me from New Delhi. Ms Hogg, the Sri Lankan army says that 30 civilians have been killed in the past 48 hours, but the rebels claim that it's more like 1,000 civilians. Do we have any idea what the truth is?
Well, I think because the media has been completely removed from the scene and there is no access to independent monitors, the figures will remain disputable. But I would not go with either of the figures. Both figures can be highly exaggerated. What is reliable is that the number of civilian casualties continues to be high, and that is indeed very disturbing.
We're hearing reports that about 80,000 people have fled the war zone. How many people does that mean, or civilians does that mean, are still in the war zone?
Well, the UN spoke about a figure of about anywhere between 100 to 150,000 in the middle of April. And if you assume 80,000 people have left the war zone, then, we're talking about anywhere between 50 to 60,000 people who are still in a very small conflict area. By any stretch, this is a very high number because the area we're talking about is a very, very small, shrinking conflict zones, which is coming under indiscriminate and heavy shelling by the Sri Lankan military, and these people are being used as human shields by the LTTE.
The Red Cross says that the situation is nothing short of catastrophic for civilians there. Tell us more about what they're facing.
The situation is horrendous on many folds. On one level, you're talking about civilians who have been without adequate food or medicines or even water for about 3 months now, holed up inside bunkers, avoiding shells, and those who manage to come out of bunkers do not make it alive. We're talking about women, children, elderly, infirm, a vulnerable lot of people. Those who do manage to escape and come out of this shelling area and out of the conflict zone and make it to the other side, so as to say, are then taken into heavily militarized, human rights organizations term detention camps, and the government calls transit camps. But these camps they have barbed wires. Again, the access of humanitarian agencies and international agencies is very limited. Medical supplies are very limited. The hospitals who are sheltering and taking care of the injured and wounded do not have adequate supplies. They do not have anesthetics, pain medication. We're talking about very, very dire conditions here for those who are injured and wounded. Also, on the emotional level, it's been a very traumatic experience for thousands of people who fled the conflict zones. They are not being allowed to take shelter with host families. They're not being allowed access to members of their family who may be in different camps. According to any international standards which apply to displaced persons, this is very, very galling.
You mentioned earlier that independent observers haven't had access to the conflict zone, and that includes the media, UN and other aid agencies. Why is that? Why is the Sri Lankan government not allowing it?
Since the beginning, since virtually 2006, when the government decided to unleash its military agenda and decided that it would resolve this conflict through fighting, it has been very, very careful about allowing international access, and that is because of a widespread, it's because of various reasons, but predominantly it's because of a widespread belief in Sri Lanka that anybody who reports on the conflict or even reports on a factual side of the conflict is a traitor or is supportive of the LTTE. So they have been, therefore the media has come under attack not just in the conflict area but outside. And within the conflict area, the presumption is that the government has a lot to hide in terms of the violations of rules of war, in terms of violations of international humanitarian law. But let's not forget that the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, the Tamil Tigers, are no innocent party to this conflict. When they ruled over swathes of territory in the north and east, there was no free media in these areas. So this is nothing new for ordinary Tamil civilians in Sri Lanka. Their fate has so far, their misery the stories of their misery have not been told in reality for a very long time.
Until 2006, the Tamil Tigers controlled loosely about a third of Sri Lanka. They've obviously lost then a lot of ground in a relatively short time. Why has that happened?
they've lost all their territory. So in a sense, you're looking at the virtual demise of the LTTE as a conventional force. Why has that happened? For various reasons, one starting which is the fact that the government of Mahinda Rajapaksa got elected on the basis of resolving this conflict through a military campaign. He had the mandate of people to resolve this through military means, and this was unanimous. It has never been so in Sri Lanka before. So the Tamil Tigers in that sense faced a formidable force. The Sri Lankan military has also received a lot of support, a lot of military hardware from the Chinese government, from the Pakistani government, and they have intrinsically put all their resources into fighting this military campaign. The Sri Lankan economy is in a dire state because it is a war economy, but they have achieved what they set out to achieve. The LTTE, on the other hand, because of their sort of deplorable human rights practices, which included child recruitment, which included extortion of the diaspora internationally, have been proscribed in more and more countries. Their funding and their support has increasingly come under scrutiny. You know, in 2006, the EU banned them, and that was a huge blow to the LTTE. And beyond that, you know, the LTTE has faced a lot of scrutiny in terms of its on the international seas, because of Indian intelligence, because of US intelligence. So it has been under pressure in terms of its own fundraising, in terms of its arms procurement, and the Sri Lankan government, on the other hand, has been bolstered in its war efforts because it has pumped in more resources into its military campaign.
The LTT has rebounded from setbacks before. Can they rebound from this?
The LTT will never become the kind of conventional military force as it once was, because as we see, it now controls very little or hardly any land. I mean, it's a matter of days when the LTT is perhaps completely loses all control over territory. So it will be next to impossible for it to get back to that position of strength. But this does not mean the end of the LTTE or the end of LTTE terrorism or its striking potential. As we have witnessed all through this last phase of the conflict, in the past 3 months to be precise, you know, every military conquest by the Sri Lankan military has been followed and preceded by a subsequent suicide bombing or an attack, whether it was happened in the east of the country, in the north, or in the capital Colombo. So there are underground LTTE cadre, the diaspora is getting even more embittered, and support for LTTE or the kind of strategy that it represents, a kind of a physical terrorist reply to the Sri Lankan government's military campaign, will have support. So this is not the end of the LTTE, and this is not the beginning of peace in Sri Lanka.
So even if the Sri Lankan army is successful and they do take the remaining territory away from the Tamil Tigers, as you say, it doesn't necessarily mean peace will come to Sri Lanka. But what do you think Sri Lanka will look like post this conflict?
As of now, there are no leaders within the Tamil community, whether moderate or militant, who can claim to be representatives of the minority Tamil community. So in that sense, who is going to represent the Tamils? And what sort of power sharing is going to evolve? Are there going to be political negotiations? Is there going to be an ultimate settlement of the genuine political grievances that the Tamil minority community has? These are all questions which hang unanswered.
What role do you think that the international community needs to play at the moment?
The international community has been sort of becoming a bit more vociferous in commenting and putting pressure on the Sri Lankan government, but clearly it has not been enough. Because if, over 5,000 civilians have been killed so far, and these are very preventable deaths, because there have been violations of rules of war by both sides, and the international community has not been able to exert enough pressure on both sides. Sure, the Tamil Tigers are a non-state actor, and therefore leverages on them are few, but there are leverages on the Sri Lankan government. So the international community really has the responsibility to to use these leverages of trade and aid, and multilateral organizations need to exercise this leverage as well to bring pressure on the Sri Lankan government to actually conduct a humanitarian evacuation of the remaining civilians and to prevent these senseless deaths.
Charu Lata Hogg, we really appreciate you coming in to speak to us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.